Well, hello. We're going to do Tongues Talk number 6. And this one's going to be a wild ride today. So hang on. Don't fall off, okay? So let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 14. And 1 Corinthians chapter 14 will kind of lead us along the way here. Okay, so we're in New NIV, so we can have a less confusing translation than Holman Christian Standard Bible on this particular chapter. And what I want to do is I want to give you something which I have not talked about, and I need to talk about it now. When we talk about tongues, we need to understand that in the subject of tongues, that there are 4 basic opinions about what tongues are. I mean, seriously, there's no unity at all among scholars. In fact, I looked at bunches and bunches of articles and bunches of commentaries, not bunches of commentaries, but everyone I could get my hands on. And there's really a lot of variety in what they say, and they're also positive that they're right. So I'm going to give you the 4 possibilities for what the gift of tongues could be. And the first is that it could be a foreign language. The argument for that is going to be pretty obvious in the book of Acts. I think I'd better show you that, because when I show it to you, I think you'll see why that sounds right in the book of Acts. Now, all of them, here we are, were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. I've already talked about this. They began to speak in other tongues. Before we read anything else, we read that they're speaking in different languages, and it is important that it is different languages. It says both of those words, and the normal word for this word glossa is a language. And so the fact that it says they were speaking in different languages sounds like they were speaking in different languages. And so the miracle of Pentecost is not that the people understood a heavenly language in their own language, but that they were speaking in different languages. Verse 4, I think, tells us for certain that we're talking about different languages. All right. So the reason I bring that up is so that we understand that it is not unreasonable to think that, that's not right. There we go. 1 Corinthians 14. It's not unreasonable to call tongues a foreign language. So that would be that a person speaks in a language that's not their own. And we talked about in our class session today that tongues are always praise. They're praise or thanksgiving. It's always directed to God in praise or thanksgiving or prayer. It's never preaching. So that we just have this idea that it would be speaking to God in a foreign language that you probably don't know. And certainly the people in the room don't know it. Okay, number 1. Number 2, tongues could be an angelic language. And of course, the evidence for that would be 1 Corinthians chapter 13. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, so they say, well, if I speak in the tongues of angels, and so then tongues would be a heavenly language. And the problem with that theory of it being a heavenly language is the fact that he says, where there are tongues, they will be still, they'll stop. And angels are going to keep on speaking. So I don't understand how an angelic language can just stop. Well, what does that mean? I say, well, that doesn't quite make sense. So some people say, well, it's a heavenly language, and then the same criticism comes. You go, well, the heavenly language is going to stop? It doesn't make any sense. So that's the problem with this angelic language. But really good scholars believe in it. I have 4 commentaries today. Each one believes something different. So Gordon Fee believed that this is heavenly language. The third understanding of it is that it is a language of a different kind. It's a language of spirit, a language of feeling, a language of heart and of emotion. And it truly expresses emotion. It truly expresses your inner being, but it doesn't express it in words that are understandable. And the basis for this theory is Romans chapter 8. I will just show you the passage. Not only so, but we ourselves, having the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our body, bus. That's the only um, that's the only passage that people can quote and say, well, this is what tongues are. It's a groaning inwardly as we eagerly await our adoption as sons. It's pouring out our inner beings to God in this emotional language that comes out of us. It's real, it's truly our emotions, but it's not words per se. So that's the evidence. There's no other evidence for that. The problem with that theory is 1 Corinthians 14 makes it very clear the tongues need to be interpreted. And so if it's an emotional feeling that's welling out of me and it comes out in these sounds, and the sounds are not really a language, then the question is, how are they interpreted? You can say, well, we interpret the feeling of it. Yes, but it doesn't sound to me, that doesn't sound to me like that's enough. I don't know, I don't get that. So it's possible. I just have a problem because of the interpretation thing. All right, the fourth is that tongues is what they call ecstatic speech, which means we're out of control of our tongues, and whatever is coming because whether it's the Holy Spirit or the human spirit or whatever, but something is making us make these sounds, and it's ecstasy. It's not something that can be examined or understood. It's when we are controlled by something outside of ourselves, the Holy Spirit. But the problem with that theory, and I think it's a major, major, major problem, is that Paul says the spirits of prophets are subject to the control of prophets. It's talking about prophets, but it's in the context of tongues, because in verses 26 through 28, Paul makes it very clear that there should only be 3 occasions of tongues in his church service, at most 2 or 3, no more than that. And they have to be interpreted. And I just don't see how that's ecstatic speech. I don't see how that's, I'm out of control, because it doesn't sound like you're out of control if someone speaks and then another person has to interpret, or this person who spoke, that person can interpret it if God gives it to them. So my question is, how's that ecstatic speech? It doesn't sound like it. And the good scholars that I respect, I haven't read any of them that believe it's ecstatic speech. It's mostly people who don't believe the Bible is without error that say that. But I might be wrong. There might be somebody that I don't know about, but still, I don't know. 4 options. Foreign language, that it is heavenly language or angelic language. Third, that it's an emotional language that expresses emotion rather than normal words. And the fourth would be that it's just ecstatic, and it's just like we're out of control of the Spirit. The Spirit is taking control of us, and he's just speaking however he wants to speak, and we just are controlled. So those are the four options. And so basically, you need to remember this, because we're going to keep on looking at these verses and we're going to go, oh, which option is this? And I'm quite serious. It's pretty complicated. It ain't easy at all. All right, so we just start right off in verse 2. For anyone who speaks in a tongue does not speak to men, but to God. Indeed, no one understands him. He utters mysteries with his spirit, or by the Spirit. Let me see what that is in the Greek. Is the word his there? I don't think so. We need a little Greek here. I should have looked at this and I didn't. I apologize. Yeah, it doesn't say his spirit. That's bad. I don't know. They shouldn't have done that. It doesn't say in his spirit. It says in spirit. And I don't think it's his spirit. I think it's the Holy Spirit. I really do. I don't think it's his spirit. So I think what it's saying is that anyone who speaks in a tongue does not speak to men, but to God. Indeed, no one understands him. He utters mysteries in the spirit. It's pneumati, which is the dative case. And the idea can be with his spirit or by his spirit. Most certainly can be both of those. And it can also be in the spirit. I think it's in the spirit. Okay, so then here we go. All right, so we've got our first clue is that the person who is speaking in a tongue doesn't speak to men, but to God, because no one understands him. And so I'm just going to say, I think that we're going to have to make as a principle. Yeah, let's write this on the whiteboard. I think we're going to have to make this as just a principle, period. The tongues is speaking to God, not to man. And now, we have to be careful, because when we speak to God, we have to actually speak to God, okay? And we have to speak to God, and we have to speak to God in a way that also speaks to men. Yes. We just can't do part of that. We've got to do all of that, okay? But tongues, I'm not being able to figure out how to do what I normally do here, because normally it gives me the option of words. Oh, there it is. That's why. Ha, ha, ha. Okay, so tongues speaks to God. And we'll just say verse 2. All right? A lot of stuff here. Man, there's a lot of stuff. So tongue speaks to God. And we just better put another one. No, we don't want to do that. No, we don't want to do that. Text. No one understands. I don't know. I think that's a really important part of this discussion. No one understands it. I really think that's what we keep dealing with. I think if we don't get that, we're really missing out. All right, next. Okay, he who speaks in a tongue edifies himself, but he who prophesies edifies the church. So the person who speaks in a tongue edifies himself or herself. I think that's pretty important for us to keep in mind. Edifies himself. This is because the person who's speaking in a tongue is speaking to God. And so it's edifying the person who's speaking in the tongue, and it's edifying to God. But the other people around, it's not edifying unless they know what he's saying. If they don't know what he's saying, it's not edifying at all. And that's a big issue. Verse 5, I would like every one of you to speak in tongues. I'm going to correct that just a little bit. Here you go. I wish you all spoke in tongues, but rather, I don't like that, especially it's misspelled. That's different. That's not what I was worried about. Rather, you prophesied. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so I wish you all spoke in tongues. And he's actually saying that. I've seen a couple of different explanations of it. The word, this is the word thelo, which is the word for wish or want. Thelo can mean I wish. It can mean I would be delighted or happy. So I've seen one translation say, I would be delighted if you all spoke in tongues. I don't know. So the problem that we have right away is saying, well, how does that fit in with chapter 12? Because in chapter 12, Paul says, not all speak in tongues, do they? Not all prophesy, do they? Not all work miracles, do they? And so you're going, well, no, they don't. They don't do that. So then the question is, if not all do that, then why is Paul saying, I wish you all spoke in tongues? But then why does he say, but rather that you prophesied? Is Paul saying that he wishes that everybody prophesied? So we have to hold that one. That is one of our key verses. Because whatever solution we come to this, we've got to be able to figure out that verse, because that verse there, and I'm sorry, but it's confusing. It's a confusing verse. So we've got to get that verse figured out, okay? All right. He who prophesies is greater than he who speaks in tongues. This doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound right, because Paul told us in chapter 12, honestly, the one prophesying is greater than the one speaking in tongues. That just bothers us. All of us are bothered by that. Like, what? How can Paul say that? Because that's the opposite of what we've been saying. We've been saying that all the gifts are the same. They're all equal. They're all as equally as good because God's the one that gives them. Now he's saying the one who's prophesying is greater than the one speaking in tongues. So you're like, Paul, I don't understand what you're saying here. So we need to keep moving, although maybe not. Let's look at the time. Yeah, we probably should be done here. That's pretty good. We covered the first paragraph. We got some messes here. This is a mess. Tongues speaks to God. No one understands. Edifies himself. I wish you all spoke in tongues, but rather that you prophesied. One prophesying is greater than one speaking in tongues. Okay, now what we need to do is keep these statements. We can't lose these statements. Okay, that's the trick. That's the trick, is that we come up with our theory of what tongues is, and then what we do is we ignore all of these verses that we don't like. And then we're really in a mess, because we're like, well, this is what tongues is. I understand what tongues is. Yeah, I've got it all figured out. But you're not looking at the text. You ignore every one of the verses that you don't like. So there's a verse that we're going to look at next time. And I don't know, we're running out of time. There's a verse that we're going to look at next time. Yeah, we'll have to be next time. It's way too late. So the next time we're going to look at this verse, you're going to go, okay, now how does that fit in? Honestly, there are a couple of verses that are so clear and have to be a part of our theology, and nobody's doing it. They're just like ignoring it as if it isn't there. So we have to deal with it. Okay, I'm just going to tell you, I gave you 4 theories, and I just want to make sure you know that I'm not sure. After dealing with this for 45 years. I mean, I started speaking in tongues 45 years ago. I stopped speaking in tongues, which is a different story. But sorry for all the noise and everything. My daughter and my daughters and my wife were just WhatsApping each other. But anyway, my point is I've really studied this a lot. I've done a ton of work on it. My doctoral dissertation was on spiritual gifts. So it's like I really know a lot about this subject. However, having said that, this question of what tongues is, the gift of tongues is, it ain't easy. It's really not easy. It's like, whoa. Okay, so I'll be back. Have a wonderful week. And don't forget to comment on these things. Good grief, you got to comment. This is no good. There's a lot of students are not doing their work. It's just like very disturbing. What are we going to do? Okay, God bless y'all.